All right, I want to thank everyone again for joining JMT Consulting today for our Expert Speaker Series. My name is Megan Mendiola, and I am a Regional Marketing Coordinator here at JMT. We're very excited to have our own Brad Karson here with us today to share with us some best practices of software selection. This webinar is sponsored by JMT Consulting. We are an ERP and financial management solutions consulting firm. We have over 28 years of experience specializing in nonprofits. We partner with a wide variety of software partners to find the best solution for your nonprofit. I'll go ahead and share just a few housekeeping notes before we get started, and then I'll turn it over to Brad. If you have any questions during the webinar, please submit them to the Q&A section. We will wait to answer questions until the end of the webinar, but please submit them as you think of them. Today's webinar recording and slides will be emailed to you within 24 hours following the conclusion of the webinar. Now I'd like to introduce Brad Karson. Brad serves as the Director of Client Services for JMT Consulting and is an experienced finance and operations leader with expertise in financial reporting and analytics. He has more than 18 years of professional experience and was most recently the Vice President of Finance for Pencils of Promise. Brad holds a BS in Business Management from Penn State University, as well as a Chartered Financial Analyst designation. Additionally, Brad has earned a Certificate of Professional Achievement with a focus on nonprofit management from Columbia University. And with that, Brad, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Megan, and thanks, everybody, for joining. Hopefully, we can cover all the content that we prepared in the next hour or so. I will do my best to speak a lot more slowly than I am used to, especially when I am caffeinated. So just as a brief introduction of what we plan on covering today. There we go. We'll provide a brief introduction on the content and really provide some context around how a software selection really fits in with an organization's operating model. We'll lay out really the core objectives that we plan on covering in today's session. We'll touch on the key activities that you may want to undertake under your system selection. What are the criteria to include as part of your evaluation, as well as what are some of the tools and templates that help guide you through the process, as well as collect and synthesize the information so that you can make a well-informed decision. We'll wrap things up with a brief conclusion, and then, as Megan had mentioned, we will leave time at the end for questions. As mentioned in the introduction, JMT Consulting is dedicated to serving the nonprofit community, and we do this through enabling our clients to focus more on serving their missions by optimizing their accounting and finance functions. Primarily, this is done through the selection, implementation, and support of technology and solutions. And the type of systems that we work with are your core ERP or general ledger systems, as well as complementary systems that support reporting, budgeting and forecasting, accounts payable workflow, time and expense management, HR management, among other systems. In my role at JMT as Director of Client Services, a key aspect is to advise as clients on how their systems can support their operating model. Key thing to note here is that the operating model, as we view it, is comprised of the following interrelated components. People, and this means the culture of the organization, the capabilities of your team members, as well as their capacity to perform their duties. Process, how efficient are the processes designed, what controls are in place, and what is the overall risk management environment. Technology, this is how we enable the enabling tools that allow people to perform their roles, how integrated the environment is, what is the overall utility of the systems in place, meaning are you using the systems to their full capability, and then how automated are the processes supported by the systems. The last piece, and the one piece that I will say gets more undervalued, is data. Several components that we look at when looking at data with our clients. It's the hygiene And data hygiene alludes to the completeness of your data sets and the consistency of application. When I mean, one thing about consistency that I'll say is that I've stopped being shocked when going into clients and hearing that across departments they may have different definitions for what revenue is. Some of it is understanding around what's GAAP revenue versus cash, as well as the different systems. The development team may pull their revenue numbers out of Salesforce. The finance team pulls it out of the general ledger, and those two numbers don't match. Well, which number is the gold standard that the organization should measure? And first off, why do those two numbers not match up? So understanding the components of the data set and when people are talking about using the similar terminology, making sure that they mean the same thing. The single source of the truth. This is something that is ever elusive with our clients. And what is the strategy to have a single repository for information? And then, are your systems generating your reports, or are you doing a lot of your reporting with data manipulation in Excel? As we get more into this presentation, we'll touch upon how the topic of software selection fits into the enhancement of that operating model, as well as the overall operating model lifecycle. Much of the content that we'll be going through today will be derived from my diverse experiences from advising organizations and guiding them through their software evaluation process. I also have experiences working for large financial software providers, both on the sales and delivery side, and then also being a part of a senior finance team that had to make decisions. So really covering all stakeholder angles. We'll be able to bring some of those experiences to bear for today's conversation. Well, some additional context for today, just some general trends and observations related to the sector. Nonprofit organizations continue to have evolving needs to incorporate technology to support their operating models. This is mainly to enhance their reporting needs, whether they're driven by the board, driven by their donors. Tend to have management requesting being more sophisticated in their information needs, and then also being able to get information in a more real-time basis. This continues to be a struggle. One key contributor is that these organizations do underappreciate the discipline of selecting, implementing, and supporting a system that can be sustainable in the long term. Finance and accounting technologies are usually the biggest piece of software in a nonprofit organization's budget. And the software model that we usually see is one that's made up of a couple larger scale systems, one being the general ledger, the other being your donor management system, supported by some function-specific applications, whether it's for payment processing, timesheets, budgeting, payroll. But we cannot also ignore the reliance that organizations have on Excel to essentially be the Band-Aid to piece together any gaps in their operating environment. The big mistake that most organizations make in selecting systems is when they select systems in a vacuum, really with no central oversight that not only helps validate that the software is suitable to support the targeted function, but also that it can integrate with other complementary functions. The hope is that with the content today, you'll help your organizations be more strategic in the selection of software so that you can be more efficient with your limited resources, be able to make more information-based decisions, extract maximum capabilities from your staff, and all of this being said in the support of your missions. So the goal of today's session is to provide guidance on how to make an informed decision when evaluating the software applications for your organizations through describing a process roadmap for the activities to include in your evaluation, define the key evaluation criteria to identify the best fit, and then identify the tools and templates needed to support the evaluation process. As we alluded to in the beginning, the introduction, we talked about the operating model. And when we start talking about the operations lifecycle, these are all the key steps to really help improve your overall environment. The system selection is a sub-process of this, and it strives to help support the people, process, technology, and data components of the organization. So the first step in the operations lifecycle is the current state assessment. This is where we help understand all the systems and processes in use, along with the information flows and handoffs, identify the pain points and opportunities, prioritize the activities that follow. I often find that going through this process, I should always walk into clients armed with a couch for clients to lie down and go and relieve themselves of all their troubles, because it really becomes a bit of a cathartic experience for them when they go through and really lay out all the things that need to be improved. And then it can also be somewhat overwhelming for management to see them really synthesized on an organizational level and understand how best to prioritize those items. The next phase is the target state design. So during the current state assessment, we identify all the gaps and provide a directional roadmap on how to remediate those gaps. The target state design is where we start to design how those gaps will be filled. And in this process, we define all of the requirements, whether they're functional, technical, as well as reporting. We look to make sure we establish, if it doesn't exist, if it does exist, we'll enhance a data governance model. This really helps bind together all the things that I discussed earlier as far as data hygiene. Key component of this is establishing a data dictionary across the organization so that every member of the organization is working off the same definitions of terminology. And then also highlighted in red is the evaluate the system options, and this is where we'll be spending most of the time today in today's discussion. Once we've identified what our solution is going to look like, then we can implement it. And the implementation process usually involves putting together our system architecture, documentation, and information flow, the system design, going through the configuration of the new system, migrating data to the new system, updating our policies and procedures that will have been modified because of our new systems. In some cases, we may determine that in our current state assessment that there were gaps in our policies around approvals, around dollar thresholds. Staff gets trained during the implementation process, and then at the end of it, we flip a switch and you go live. The last piece of the life cycle is the sustainability of all the activities that we perform prior to. There's support, and I'd say the last two pieces wind up making this, shifting this chart, this graph, a little bit from a more of a linear view to more cyclical, because any organization that really wants to maximize the lifespan and the effectiveness of their systems, having a mechanism in place where they are monitoring and identifying continuous improvement opportunities allows them to really take a clinical look at everything that they do on a periodic basis and make minor modifications. All too often we go into organizations and they say, well, this system doesn't work, and we start diving into the history of it all, and they implemented the system 20 years ago, and they made no investment as far as time and effort just to modify your chart of accounts, add a new report, clean up vendors. We've got one client that's got hundreds of inactive vendors that they can't get rid of because of the time it takes to delete them all. So really having discipline and being able to review your data sets as well as the functionality of the system can really make these projects much more impactful across the organization. I'd be remiss if I didn't also highlight the fact that having project and change management in place is a necessary piece to support each phase of this life cycle. It increases the probability of success and creates a culture of accountability and communication at each phase. For project management, there are things such as assigning tasks and timelines, tracking progress against plan, identifying issues, and developing remediation strategies. And with change management, this is where we're able to facilitate buy-in throughout the process. Having your stakeholders buy in early, and those with enough visibility to make that buy-in and enthusiasm for a new solution contagious, can really help exponentially improve the probability of success. That includes having the proper tone at the top, so executive sponsorship, as well as identifying those who would be viewed as your power users. So these are the folks that will be able to effectively administer the application. A lot of these applications really don't rely anymore on having a dedicated IT team, but more just somebody who can adjust user preferences, user access, manage a chart of accounts, be your key report builder. All of these things really don't require any sort of technical knowledge, but more just understanding how the system and applications work. Also, part of the change management plan is communication strategy, training, so identifying the training needs and being able to provide that, and then ongoing support needs. When a system is implemented from your vendor, are they just leaving, or and it's up to you to sustain the system, or are they leaving you with the tools and capabilities to provide to be more self-reliant? So now that we've identified the need for a new system, what does the process look like? The following steps that we have laid out here can apply to any evaluation of software. I mean, really any evaluation of any sort of purchase you plan on making for your organization, and really help strive towards that fully informed, fact-based decision. There are certain components of a system selection that are more subjective than others, but trying to get it down to the objective measures can really help it become more of a science and less of an art form. So during the operations lifecycle, we've identified that there is a need for a system, whether it's to replace an existing system or is it to fill a need that's currently not being met by technology. As we start to identify that need, well, what are the requirements? What are the specific pieces of functionality that we need? So to look at a process like accounts payable, well, we're going to need some level of approval to release funds from our bank account. That just using that as a very basic example throughout this discussion. Initial partner identification. When I use the term vendor, partner, software provider, I use those interchangeably, but I really view these organizations, they become your partners. They become embedded within your organization, not only during implementation, but they're extensions of your team as far as their support model. And the identification of these partners can be done in a variety of ways. You can go and do a search online. You can get it from word of mouth from some of your peers. Also by going to sector events and conferences, learning about these vendors who may be exhibiting at a booth. And various ways to identify who those vendors are, or partners are. One step that you may decide to take to begin to filter out that partner population is to send them an RFI, or request for information. We'll go through a little bit of what the RFI does, a little bit more in detail later on in the conversation. But the RFI essentially allows you to collect a lot of information from vendors, who they are, what they support, how they support it, and then you can use that information to be able to start filtering it and whittling it down, so that you can start to invite vendors in for initial demonstrations and presentations. This activity is your way of getting your first view of the system in action. The vendors will come in. They'll give you some background on the organization, full scope of services that they provide, and they'll do usually a standard presentation. during the course of these presentations, the good vendors are learning about you just as much as you're learning about them. So as they continue to progress down this process, they're able to put more and more of a tailored proposal and presentation together for you. Once you get through the initial demos and presentation, it may be necessary and worthwhile to go on through follow-on or do specific demos, whether it's to dive into where the initial demo may show the breadth of a system. A specific demo may show you the depth and allow you time to dive into a particular process or component of the application. During these demos, it may be worthwhile to give the vendor a sample data set so they can plug it into their system and present back what it would look like, so you have a little bit more of a real-life view of how the system would support your organization. As I mentioned before, vendors are learning about you at each step of this process. They're learning about your requirements. They're learning about things that may need to be customized or configured. While most software systems some can be viewed as plug and play, most of them require some level of effort to be able to implement them and have them up and running for your organization. The scoping process allows the vendor to uncover the key things that they'll need to be able to put together a more tailored proposal. Often at this stage, both sides of the table, the vendor and the organization, they don't know necessarily what they don't know. And there may be things that come up during the course of the implementation that may result in a change order. But the scoping process probably will get you about 80–90% of the way there of what the implementation will look like. Most vendors have a basic questionnaire that they'll use as a starting point, and then further discussions will help refine that so that at the end of the day, they'll be able to put together a proposal. And this proposal should be a tailored document that will give you as the software selector everything that you would need to be able to understand what the costs are going to be, what the timeline's going to look like, who's going to be involved, what the solution is going to look like, and then they'll also should provide some references. I view this as probably the most important thing as far as making a decision and can help you decide. I do recommend that not only do you follow up with the references that the vendors provide, but also through your network, you reach out to some potential clients of theirs as well. These reference calls allow you to get real-life experiences, not only with the technologies, but also the experience of partnering with each of the software providers. It can cover things such as, okay, well, how well did the implemented product match up to the proposal or what the vendor promised? What did the implementation experience look like? Did you feel like there was proper communication? Were things being done timely? How responsive was the team? How knowledgeable was the team? On an ongoing basis, what does support look like? So what's the responsiveness and issue resolution process look like? And then also from a technical standpoint, is the system being modified and upgraded as technology needs change? You tend to see this a lot with organizations or applications that were more desktop-based that are converting more to a web-based. And we'll touch on some of that when we get to evaluation criteria, but just the overall technology roadmap and the comfort with that helps from your references, really helps you make that more informed decision. So as we are going through each of those steps of the process, and one more disclaimer about the previous slide is that all these steps aren't necessary as part of the process. Depending on the scope, timeliness, you may decide to combine different steps, but that would be the process above provides a good starting point for how to expand or whittle down that process. And we're looking at the evaluation criteria. These are things just above and beyond functional fit. These are things that help determine the best partner. The weighting of each of these categories may vary based on not only the organization but the type of application, and even within an organization it may vary from individual to individual. First category that we'll look at is total cost of ownership or return on investment. And this is where we take a look at all of the costs required to implement and support the new system. As most systems are becoming more cloud-based, the need to include server costs and the cost of ownership winds up being less and less of a data point here. But if you are looking at privately hosted solutions, understanding the server maintenance costs, which should be a component of this. The ROI model winds up being something that I find very telling. It allows you to better quantify the anticipated realized benefits of the new system. Where I run into some obstacles with where the ROI model becomes most useful is when you're looking at bringing in a system that's not replacing anything. In most instances, it winds up replacing Excel. Common tools that really come in to replace Excel are things that manage budgeting and forecasting. Excel is a great tool because it's cost efficient. It's very flexible from reporting, but it lacks the proper controls around data inputs, data validation that a system may provide you. So when clients are looking at budgeting and forecasting tools, they say, "Oh wow, I'm paying virtually nothing for Excel, but you're saying that it's going to cost X amount." Well, when you start to take a look at the time spent to deaggregate your Excel budget files and send them out to the various stakeholders, collect them, modify them, and transform the data, because in some instances the data comes back in formats that aren't useful to you and you need to transform the data. How you re-aggregate all of that, how you spend time checking, doing an audit check and review, being able to, the time spent sending individual emails to follow up, the time spent auditing all of the formulas, as well as having the comfort of having a system that supports the overall risk and control management. Sometimes those benefits outweigh the costs of bringing in a system that essentially had minimal cost to the organization. So definitely looking at things just beyond costs is a key thing to look at when evaluating systems. The partner team, or the vendor team, includes management, the implementation team, support team. As part of the RFP, that the proposal that gets submitted should include bios of not only who's guiding the vision of the organization, but also who are going to be your day-to-day team members that you're going to interact with. As I mentioned before, these essentially become extensions of your team. What are their experiences, not only in the sector, but also with the product? This can provide insight on future support. User access and interface. I was alluded to this a little bit earlier when talking about the move from a desktop application to a web-based. So the ease of access and intuitiveness of the user interface really helps facilitate organizational acceptance and success. There are a couple ways to look at what's web-based access. There are tools where you just log in from your browser and you're in the system. And there are others where you log into a website, you log into a VPN, and you're basically transported to a remote desktop that has the application built onto it. That approach winds up being a little bit more dated and could be an indication of lack of technological advancement of the application. Integration capabilities. So how do we achieve that ever-elusive single source of the truth? What is the seamlessness and frequency of system-to-system integrations? In virtually all cases, there is no one-size single-stack solution that's going to meet all of the needs of all your stakeholders. And there are going to need to be interconnections to bring data from system to system. Is there a requirement to extract data from one system, transform it, and then load it into another? Or are the pipes already connected to integrate your donor management system into your general ledger and view everything in real time? Client support model. So what is the accessibility to the client support team, and what's the average response and resolution times? I would include this as part of your RFI, just to get an understanding of how your team can be supported on an ongoing basis, along with getting an understanding of what client support documentation and tools are available. Are there how-to manuals, quick sheets? One of the things that JMT does a good job is providing our clients with recorded webinars for some of the products we support. And then once the implementation team packs up their bags and moves on to their next project, what type of online documentation can the team leverage, as well as not only leverage today, but as the staff of the organization starts to turn over, how does that documentation help support and be used as a training tool to facilitate a smoother transition as staff members may change? And the last piece is the future roadmap and upgrade approach. What are some of the new features and product enhancements that the vendor has in the short, medium, and long term? And are those changes, has the vendor shown a historical record of being able to evolve and keep pace with technology as it changes? So having the right tools in place can really help, facilitate the process of pulling together the data, managing the process, to allow you and your evaluation team to make a fully informed decision. And this slide just has some examples of tools that we find clients have found useful to support their evaluation process. The project plan. This provides a detail of the tasks involved, who the owners and timelines are to complete not only the implementation, but even the selection. The selection winds up being a project unto itself. This helps guide the project and provides a feedback mechanism for tracking progress. The change management plan. As I mentioned before, this is really overlooked. And when doing postmortems with clients, this is often when this doesn't get addressed appropriately throughout the selection and implementation, this winds up being one of the primary culprits when there's lack of success. Change management plan can help you identify the key touch points with critical stakeholders and allows the team to measure stakeholder commitment throughout. A good example of measuring stakeholder commitment is if the CFO is in a vendor demo and is looking at their phone the entire time. Does that give a good indication that the CFO has really bought into the importance of this project? Probably not. So just making sure that somebody's holding everybody accountable so that there is that effective tone at the top established. Requirements documentation. I'd say, if you go back to the slide that had the process map on it, requirements are documented early on in the process, and this winds up being something that is used as a reference point often throughout the process. This is a document that really describes and prioritizes the functional and technical requirements for all the in-scope aspects of the evaluation. It helps illustrate the needs of the organization and serves as the foundation for measuring vendor capabilities against the needs of the organization. Vendor demonstration script. This allows the organization to take more control of the demos and presentations themselves, and puts the onus on the vendor to show how the organization, how your organization how their application can meet your needs and not just be a showcase for only the positive features of the system. During that initial demo, the vendor's going to show you all the bells and whistles that they want you to see. Having managed several vendor demonstrations myself, they know the system. They know what shows well, which may be what can be clunky, and they'll guide the presentation away from the clunky things unless they're asked a specific question. So this vendor script really allows you to set the agenda so that you can see what you really need to see. I would say the vendor demo script probably is more of a follow-on / specific demo rather than going through the initial presentation, so that you can really take in all that the vendor may have to offer as part of that initial demonstration. The RFI, RFP document, and scorecard. We talked about this before. These are essentially information requests for the vendor to respond to. That RFI is a good way to get the introductory background on the vendor organization, application features and functionality fit, as well as indicative pricing. These RFIs are probably more helpful in filtering out unqualified vendors based on their responses, but as part of an RFI, I often find it helpful to take the requirements that we previously defined and have the vendor provide responses as to whether or not they can support that function either out of the box, meaning there's no effort needs to be done to have this function available. It's something that is available through configuration. So just as an example, is going back to the AP example, if your organization requires only one level of approval to send funds out, and all you need to do is designate who that user is going to be for approval, that's more of a configuration item. If you've got two levels of approval and the system only supports one, and the vendor would need to essentially write new code to support that feature, then that's a customization. So I'll give you a sense of the level of effort required to get the system set up so that it would meet your requirements. The RFP is a much more tailored process and results in that specific proposal for your organization. Those vendors are learning about you through each step of the process, and the level of specificity that's included in the RFP response is also a good indicator as the service levels the vendor can provide you. While developing the RFIs and RFPs, it's important to keep in mind how that information can be useful. Don't just ask for the information to ask for the information. Each piece of information should be an input into your scoring mechanism. Coming up with that appropriate scoring mechanism can help you objectively evaluate responses and allow you to more effectively guide your team in the decision-making process. And the last enabler that we wanted to share with you is the stakeholder evaluation scorecard. It's another tool that helps support the project management team to effectively and more deliberately identify who the key influencers are in moving the project forward, and provides a periodic assessment as where they are based on their current degree of impact. It's important to go through this exercise to make sure the executive buy-in and sponsorship are in place, as well as through those individual team members that carry a high amount of influence throughout the organization. It's important to have it in place at the beginning and make sure that the objectives are clear at each step. All right, so as we start to wrap up the content, we covered what we view as the best practice for making an informed decision when selecting a software partner. And just to review, we went through the appropriate process steps to identify, filter, and select a partner of best fit. We defined the key evaluation criteria to determine the partner that is most suitable for your organization. And we identified key tools and templates that will help you gather all the relevant information and to coordinate across all key stakeholders. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't leave out this disclaimer, is that each evaluation and organization is different. Stakeholder involvement is most critical and also the most overlooked. Hopefully today we've given you the information that you need to take back to your organizations so you can support a successful selection implementation project that allows you to achieve long-term sustainability. Before we shift into question and answer for the remaining time we have left, we want to make one last housekeeping announcement. May 4th through 7th, we'll be hosting what will be our 14th annual Innovate Conference. It provides a good educational and training opportunity, and it's designed specifically for nonprofit professionals. At this event, we provide opportunities for hands-on training, idea sharing, provides a networking opportunity to collaborate with other nonprofits. It's a great way to earn up to 21 CPE credits. And for those of you on the line that are part of our extended value plan clients, first off, we thank you, but also you have discounts available to you. More information about Innovate and the registration link is on the bottom of this presentation. So with that, I will open the floor to questions.
Great, thanks, Brad. It looks like we don't have any questions as of now, but just a reminder that you can submit any questions that you may have to the Q&A section, and we will get those answered. Or if you can't find the Q&A section, we also have a chat function that you can submit questions into. Oh, it looks like we just had a question come in, so I'll go ahead and read that out to you, Brad. It says, I have been in prior selection processes where there was a voluminous requirements document, an elaborate scoring process, and much time spent on coming up with scores. The end result was inconclusive and a decision was based on feelings. Needless to say, the implementation was a failure and the software was pulled after a year of attempted implementation. What are some tips to prevent that?
Right, and that's a great question. And this is really where having an effective balance between science and art comes into play. I've seen requirements documents that are high in quantity but low in quality. It's just being judicious through the process and having somebody who's been experienced through the selection process, I think is key. We often, hear the term paralysis by analysis, and that definitely applies here. Trying to get feelings out of the process is also a challenge because in some instances there may be predetermined biases, whether it's from having experience with some of the technologies at prior places of employment, whether it's word of mouth from a colleague in the industry, trying to get to the root of those biases and dispel some of those notions if they are in fact not valid. It's part of that change management process, right? Understanding that no two implementations really look the same. No two selections look the same. Organizations are all different. They all have different fingerprints, and how the process is managed and how the information winds up getting synthesized, and that's why that scorecard winds up being key as part of the RFI, RFP. Trying to objectively measure how these systems can support your system can really start to invalidate the feelings. Or give less weight to your feelings.
Great. We had another question come in that asked if there's a copy of the slides available. And just a reminder that yes, we will send out both a copy of the slides as well as the webinar recording within 24 hours following the conclusion of this presentation, so you will get both of those. It looks like we do have a couple of follow-up questions to the one question that you just answered earlier, Brad. They also asked, What is the size of the requirements documents that you think is appropriate? And what happens if the scoring is inconclusive?
Sure. So, the size of the requirements document, it really depends. But I think you really want to make sure that it includes all of the things that your organization would view as must-haves. Must have the ability for an accounting system, must have the ability to capture debits and credits, must have the ability to make sure journal entries balance with one another, and some of those key core functions. So I'd say it depends. You want to make sure it covers all of the key process areas that you have in scope. You want to make sure that it does cover the ability to integrate with other systems, but putting a quantity and size requirement around it, I think it's tough to do, and it winds up being, you kind of know. I think what you want to do is before you send the document out, you get a sense of answering the question of how easy would it be for me to fill this out? And so I like to make things a little bit binary. So a lot of yes/no questions. Try to limit the amount of open-ended questions that can lead to what could be non-useful information. And then if the scoring is inconclusive, I've run into this from time to time. What you want to do is you really want to take the evaluation another step further. What are you hung up on? Is it both the systems? They say it's down to two systems, and both systems line up the same functionality wise. Well, then what are the other criteria? I'd say very rarely do they wind up scoring the same across all the criteria buckets, which is why we recommend you look at things such as what the team looks like, those reference checks. Those reference checks are huge. And often when things get to that inconclusive, once you get the proposals in, the reference checks winds up being that deciding factor.
Great. And then one more question that came in is, do you think that some of the basic requirements, such as debits and credits balancing, should be addressed in the RFI?
If you're really looking to limit the quantity, you could probably eliminate that, just because if it's a general ledger system, you're maintaining debits and credits. I was just using that as an example of what a functional requirement could look like. And that can also, like I said, that eliminating those types of basic things can really help you manage the amount of information to synthesize.
Great. Thank you, Brad. It looks like that's all the questions that we have for now. We will have people following up with you after the webinar, so if anyone thinks of any more questions after the webinar has concluded, you can ask them to the people following up with you, and we will get those answered for you. I just want to thank everyone for joining us today, and thank you, Brad, for your time. We hope everyone enjoyed the presentation and that you will be able to join us for future events and webinars as well. You can find out about those by visiting our website at jmtconsulting.com and clicking on the Events tab. Also, thank you, Brad, for reminding everyone about our 14th Annual Innovate Conference coming up. Just a reminder, our super early bird prices end on January 31st, so make sure you get your tickets before then to lock in our best prices. And so that will officially conclude today's webinar. Thank you again, everyone, for joining, and we hope everyone has a great rest of the day.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.